Hi, welcome back to Interactive Media. Today we're going to discuss the concept of competitive research and actually going about and conducting a competitive analysis so that you can better understand the different ways that other companies or apps design their products. And a competitive research project will help you better understand things that are going on in the marketplace, what works and what doesn't work well, and what can be improved. And this will also allow you to even potentially test other designs or other apps so that can give you information on how to move forward with your design work. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'd like to start off this particular segment with this big question: why conduct competitive research? Depending on the company that you're working with or the different types of people that you're working with, competitive research may be conducted by marketing or business or finance, etc. In this case, for designers, competitive research has a different layer of information that most designers like us are looking for. So we might be looking at the way that the messaging is targeting certain types of users, or we might be looking at the different interactions that enable someone to solve a particular problem. But overall, the details in our competitive research are generally more specific to the user or the customer and how the product works and why the product was designed a certain way to address these goals or these problems that our customers or users have. One obvious thing about competitive research, I like to think it's obvious, you never know, is that it allows us to better understand what other apps and other websites and companies are currently doing in the marketplace. So if we notice that Lyft and Uber and some of these other ride-sharing apps all have certain baseline functionality, like you can create a profile, you can tip a driver, you can find a driver right now, or you can schedule one. That helps give you a baseline, meaning kind of this consistent set of features or experiences that are just pretty much expected of an app like this. So again, competitive research allows you to uncover that type of information. It also helps us understand existing expectations in the marketplace. So if there's certain functionalities or tools or layouts or just the way that things are designed, if there's a lot of those types of consistencies out in the market, that will give you more information in order to design a better product experience for your user. Sometimes I have a particular lecture on this, but there are times for reinvention, and then there's times to take a particular pattern and to expand upon it. And those are two different types of projects that I prefer to separate. In this case, for competitive analysis, you can use this information to come up with this really big idea and concept, or you can use this to improve an existing concept. There's a couple different ways you can apply this information. A competitive analysis also allows you to understand what is not being done in the marketplace. So if there's something that's obviously glaringly omitted from a design, then that gives you a sense of perspective of maybe it wasn't a viable option in terms of building it, or some legal ramifications, or maybe this is not a good idea and other people who have tried it before. So sometimes that information is more difficult to uncover, the why something is missing, but it's still worth an examination while you do your competitive research. A competitive research project also allows you to focus more on these tangential projects as well, meaning that when you do your research for a particular app or website, you might actually look at direct competitors. So here we have maybe a hotel website, meaning you're designing for Hilton, for example, and in part of your competitive analysis, you start researching other hotels like Wyndham, Best Western, Motel 6, etc. Now, with your competitive research, you now have an opportunity to look at indirect competitors. So other people who are doing something similar but not identical, and maybe they're doing it in another kind of business space. So for instance, you're designing for Hilton, but what you want to do is learn about how other people book and reserve things or hotels, etc. So maybe you start looking at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, or you look at Car2Go or Zipcar, or maybe you look at Airbnb, who's not exactly a hotel, but they're more of a broker of experiences. Or maybe you look at an airline. When you first purchase a ticket, Generally, there's some hotel upsells or car rental upsells. So there are ways to use non-direct competitors in a competitive analysis. Sometimes it takes a bit more of an explanation to help people who are looking at that research make the connection between your primary product, your primary focus, and this indirect competitor. But it's still a very worthwhile endeavor. So there's a ton of different ways to conduct a competitive research project, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And I've given you two different ways to essentially show the information in a way that makes it easy for other people to use and understand. So as designers, we have a lot of power in that we can pretty much lay out information in a way that helps people understand these complex ideas that we're trying to communicate. So two ways that I like to approach it for my class. One is a feature inventory, meaning you'll actually take this cross-section of different apps and start listing out things and tools that currently exist for every app. So if we're looking at ride sharing, for example, we'll continue with that explanation or that example. We'll have things like sign up, log in, payment, call a car, in-car experience, driver feedback, etc. And this table inventory can give you information on different competitors that may have the feature. So a login screen is a login screen, but maybe Lyft does it better. And tips are just tips, but maybe Uber does it better. Or maybe there's different language restrictions that we need to keep in mind for other types of ride-sharing apps. So this table allows you not only to check that something is in or not in a particular app, then it also allows you to provide some more details about what worked well, what didn't work well, and what can be improved, or maybe what's just kind of novel about it, what's kind of interesting. Another thing you can do is what we call the positives and negatives. So it's essentially a graph that tells you what this particular product did well, and then what can be improved. And what you do is you take this information and then you pair it with kind of this shop along. We also call it a cognitive walkthrough. Essentially, you take a participant and you sit them down and you ask them to complete a particular task that is pertinent to your app. So if it was Lyft, you can say something like, imagine that you've just landed at the airport and you need to get a ride home and there are no taxis around and you need to use this app called Lyft in order to find a ride. Please go ahead and do so. And while you do that, please think out loud. So being able to take the data that you come up with for that interview and many others, if you're doing a full research project, you can also pair that with your speculative information or your perspective of what the product did well and what can be improved. And you can start combining your findings through research as well as your findings as a design professional looking at this information. Your competitive analysis will always be much more powerful and better communicated when you actually provide screenshots and examples of what currently exists or how things can be improved. As much as words are very descriptive, words can get very long and get very daunting when you look at it on a competitive research project or in a table. So I would always include images wherever possible, or at least link your text to images. So here's an example of that feature inventory table. So here we see a couple of different competitor apps up on the top, and then you can see the different features on the side. So being able to enter the app without signing in. Goodreads does not have it, Inobi does not have it, Booktopia has it, and Amazon has it, and etc. So we have different features that are listed on the left side, and then on the top we have the different competitors. And here we kind of have these thumbs up, thumbs down, meaning they have them or they don't have them. And in some cases it could be that they're done well and then they're done terribly. So I would also include screenshots to help extrapolate this information, better explain what you mean by create personalized profile or social cataloging component, for example. So this is also another example of the feature inventory table. So here it tells you that a particular app has it and another particular app doesn't have it. And these seem still very vague, and that could be helpful for you if you're looking at building kind of this structure of an app and different types of information that you want to show. But those little nitty-gritty details that we want to see will be better communicated through screenshots. Here's another way that you can also communicate your competitive analysis. It's again that positive and negatives table or chart or graph, however you want to lay it out. But essentially it allows us to compare multiple products side by side, and this becomes a little bit easier for people to understand when they're looking at this longitudinal view. So like many types of apps over time versus just like this particular snapshot in time of one or two apps. So this is a great way to show information, especially when you're looking to compare and contrast what works well and what didn't work well, rather than just thumbs up, thumbs down, or check mark or an X, because those can be yes or no, good or bad, but it doesn't actually tell you why. And the best thing about a competitive analysis is that it uncovers so much information that you can really bring a lot of value to your project by understanding the what and the why. And the why is most important, and that's really where the magic of the designer comes in order to interpret that information and then to cross-reference that with actual user behavior, such as through the cognitive walkthrough or the shop along. So here's another example of using screenshots to be able to show positives and negatives between two different competitors. So here in this screenshot, we are examining onboarding flow for Lyft and Uber. Onboarding is essentially getting someone to use your product for the first time and all the different steps it takes to get an account set up or just to get up and running. So here we have Lyft screenshots, and the bottom we have Uber screenshots, and then to the left side, we have the list of positive and negatives. So again, like as someone who's looking at this, it's completely disconnected from this project. I see a bunch of screenshots, but I actually don't know why it's good or why it's bad. But if I take the time to read it, I probably will. But the bullet points on the left help just give a nice digest of the information that I'm about to look at. So I heavily advocate towards having both the positives and negatives, or having more descriptors in your table of features, essentially your feature inventory table, having some more descriptors versus just yes or no. It will make it a lot more helpful to you when you actually go to develop the more finer details of your design work. So as an exercise for you before you kind of go out there and conduct your competitive research, for this particular project, you can take maybe 15-20 minutes to take two apps or websites that currently operate as competitors in the space of which you want to design for, and I would compare the features from your two competitors. So again, if it was Lyft and Uber, you have being able to hail a ride, being able to cancel a ride, being able to tip a driver, being able to put in your credit card information, being able to schedule rides ahead of time, etc. So you can audit both of your apps to see which app has what, which app doesn't have what. And then I would take it one step further by explaining what works well and what can be improved for each of those apps as well. And if you wanted to get even more detailed, then I would actually do it on a feature by feature basis. I think that would be really interesting and a great way to kind of capture all that information. And then on top of that, I would also include screenshots of those individual features and point out exactly what works well, what doesn't work well, what can be improved. That way you have a really solid understanding of your kind of marketplace. You have a lot of information that you can build upon and start designing with that information right away. So I hope that was helpful. That was our kind of section on competitive research and doing a competitive analysis. For design classes, I like to keep them very visual and really simple to put together, like a graph or a table. However, for other types of fields like marketing or like, business intelligence or research, you may be more apt to putting together an actual written report with screenshots versus just putting together this visual asset. But for designers, we will focus on creating a visual piece that shows what works well, what doesn't work well, what can be improved between multiple apps or properties. So thank you. I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you next time.